I was 8 years old when my parents abandoned me simply because I was a girl. They wanted a son to carry on the family name. I was just a burden in their eyes. 30 years later, when I inherited a $1 million fortune, they suddenly appeared with fake apologies and unacceptable demands. But this time, I would show them who really held the power. The memory still haunts me. That Tuesday morning when everything I thought I knew about love crumbled into dust. I was sitting on our faded blue carpet, carefully brushing my favorite doll's hair, humming the lullaby Mom used to sing. The house smelled like pancakes and coffee, just like every other morning. Dad was reading his newspaper at the kitchen table, and Mom was washing dishes with that distant look she always wore. From the outside, we probably looked like any ordinary American family. Dad worked construction, Mom stayed home, and we lived in a small ranch house with white picket fences and rose bushes that Mom tended every weekend. But inside those walls, something toxic was growing. Something I was too young to understand, but old enough to feel in my bones. "Sarah, honey, come here," Mom called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that strange tone I'd been hearing more often lately. Not quite cold, but not warm either. Like she was talking to a neighbor's child instead of her own daughter. I skipped into the kitchen, still clutching my doll. "Yes, Mommy?" Dad looked up from his newspaper, and I saw that familiar flash of disappointment cross his face. It was the same expression he wore every time he looked at me, like he was searching for someone else and finding me instead. "Sarah," he said, setting down his coffee mug with more force than necessary. "We need to talk." Even at 8, I knew those words meant trouble. My stomach twisted into knots as I climbed onto the kitchen chair, my feet dangling above the floor. Mom turned around, wiping her hands on her apron, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Sweetheart," Mom began, her voice wavering slightly. "You know how much Mommy and Daddy love you, right?" I nodded eagerly, desperate for that reassurance. "Yes, Mommy, I love you too." "Good," Dad interjected, his tone businesslike. "Because sometimes, when people love each other very much, they have to make difficult decisions." The words hung in the air like smoke from his morning cigarette. I didn't understand what he meant, but something deep in my chest began to ache. "We've been thinking," Mom continued, still avoiding my gaze, "about what's best for our family, for everyone." "Your brother Tommy needs things," Dad added matter-of-factly. "Important things, college, opportunities, things that cost money." I looked back and forth between them, confusion clouding my 8-year-old mind. Tommy was 2 years older and had always been the golden child. He got new clothes while I wore hand-me-downs from our cousin. He got the biggest piece of cake at birthdays. He got to stay up late and watch the shows I wasn't allowed to see. But I'd never questioned it because that's just how things were. "I don't understand," I whispered, clutching my doll tighter. Dad sighed heavily, as if I was being deliberately difficult. "Look, Sarah, we love you, but we need to be practical here. Girls? Well, girls don't need the same opportunities boys do. Tommy's going to carry on the family name. He's going to take care of us when we're old. That's what sons do." The words hit me like ice water. "But I can take care of you too, Daddy. I can help Tommy." Mom finally looked at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood turn cold, pity mixed with resignation, like she was looking at a stray animal she couldn't afford to keep. "Oh, honey," she said softly, "it's not your fault. It's just the way things are. Girls grow up and get married and become part of their husband's family. You won't be a Johnson anymore. You'll belong to someone else." "But I don't want to belong to someone else," I protested, tears starting to blur my vision. "I want to stay here with you and Daddy and Tommy." Dad's jaw tightened. "This isn't a negotiation, Sarah. We've made our decision." The room fell silent except for the tick-tick-tick of the kitchen clock. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud and frantic, like a trapped bird. "What decision?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Mom and Dad exchanged a look, one of those adult communications that happened above my head, but somehow through my heart. "We've found you a new family," Mom said finally. "The Millers. They're good people, Sarah. They'll take care of you." The words didn't make sense. They bounced around in my head like marbles in a can, creating nothing but noise. "A new family? They can't have children of their own." Dad explained, as if that made everything reasonable. They'll appreciate you more than, well, more than we can right now. With Tommy's future to think about, we just can't give you everything you deserve. But even at 8, I could hear the lie in his voice. It wasn't about giving me what I deserved. It was about me not deserving what I wanted. A place in my own family. I don't want a new family, I said, my voice getting higher and more desperate. I want this family. I want you and Mommy and Tommy. I'll be good, I promise. I'll help more around the house. I won't ask for new toys or clothes. Please don't give me away. The word away hung in the air like a death sentence. That's what this was, wasn't it? They were giving me away, like I was an old couch they couldn't fit in their new apartment, like I was something they'd outgrown. It's not about being good, Sarah, Mom said, her voice cracking slightly. You're a good girl. This is just what's best. Best for who? I shouted, surprising myself with my anger. Best for Tommy? Best for you? What about what's best for me? Dad's face darkened. Don't you raise your voice at your mother. This is exactly why we need to do this. You're becoming difficult, Sarah. Ungrateful. I'm not ungrateful, I screamed, jumping down from the chair. I just want to stay with my family. We're not your real family anyway, Dad snapped, and the words cut through me like a blade. Real families stick together. Real families don't. Never mind. He didn't finish the sentence, but I heard the unspoken words anyway. Real families don't have daughters who aren't worth keeping. Mom gasped. Robert, don't say that. Say what? The truth? Dad pushed back from the table and stood up. She's 8 years old and already talking back, already making demands. What's she going to be like at 16? At least with the Millers, she'll learn some discipline. I ran to Mom then, burying my face in her apron, breathing in the familiar scent of dish soap and vanilla perfume. Mommy, please don't let them take me. I'll be better, I promise. I'll be the best daughter ever. For a moment, just a moment, I felt her hand stroke my hair. For a heartbeat, I thought she might change her mind, might fight for me, might remember that she was supposed to love me no matter what. But then her hand stilled, and she gently pushed me away. The Millers will be here this afternoon, she said quietly. Go pack your things. The drive to the Children's Services office felt like traveling to another planet. I sat in the back seat, watching my neighborhood disappear through the rear window, clutching a small suitcase that held everything I owned in the world. My doll, a few clothes, a book of fairy tales, and a photo of our family from last Christmas, back when I still believed in happy endings. Dad kept the radio on loud, classic rock stations that filled the silence but couldn't drown out the sound of my quiet crying. Mom stared out the passenger window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Tommy hadn't even come to say goodbye. He was at a friend's house, probably playing video games, blissfully unaware that his sister was being erased from his life. The building was gray and institutional, with fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps. A social worker named Mrs. Patterson met us in the lobby, her smile too bright, her voice too cheerful, like she was trying to convince us all that this was normal, that families dropped off their children here every day like returning library books. You must be Sarah, she said, crouching down to my level. I've heard so much about you. The Millers are so excited to meet you. I said nothing. My voice had disappeared somewhere between home and here, lost along with everything else I thought I could count on. The paperwork seemed to take forever, pages and pages of documents that officially transferred me from one set of adults to another, like I was a piece of property changing hands. I sat in a plastic chair, swinging my legs and staring at the motivational posters on the walls. Every child deserves love, new beginnings. Hope is the thing with feathers. Hope felt like the furthest thing from feathers right then. It felt like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold and sharp around the edges. When the Millers arrived, I barely looked up. I'd used up all my hope in the car, wishing and praying and bargaining with God that this was all just a terrible misunderstanding, that Dad would suddenly realize he'd made a mistake and take me home. But when Mr. Miller knelt down in front of my chair, Something in his voice made me raise my eyes. "Hello, Sarah," he said softly. "I'm David Miller, and this is my wife, Margaret. We've been waiting a very long time to meet you." His voice was different from Dad's, gentler, like he actually wanted to hear what I might say back. Mrs. Miller, Margaret, sat down in the chair next to mine. She didn't try to hug me or touch me or force a smile. She just sat there, patient and quiet, like she had all the time in the world for me to decide if I wanted to trust her. "We have a room ready for you," she said eventually. "It's painted yellow because we didn't know if you'd like pink or purple or maybe green. You can help us decorate it however you want." It was such a small thing, but it hit me like a revelation. They had prepared a room for me. They had thought about what I might like. They had made space for me before they even met me. I glanced over at my parents, my former parents, and saw Dad checking his watch. Mom was filling out one last form, her signature quick and decisive, like she was signing off on a business transaction. "Are we almost done here?" Dad asked Mrs. Patterson. "I've got to get back to work." And that's when it really hit me. I wasn't just being given away. I was being discarded, disposed of. They couldn't wait to get rid of me and get back to their real life, the one where they only had the child they actually wanted. The final goodbye happened in the parking lot. Mom hugged me briefly, her embrace feeling more like an obligation than affection. Dad shook my hand. Actually shook my hand like I was a business associate he was unlikely to see again. "Be good for the Millers," he said. "Don't cause them any trouble." And then they were gone. Just like that. 8 years of being their daughter, and they drove away without looking back, without a tear, without even a promise to visit. I stood there in the parking lot, holding Margaret Miller's hand, watching the taillights of their car disappear around the corner. The stone in my chest seemed to expand, filling up all the spaces where love used to live. "It's okay to be sad," Margaret said quietly. "It's okay to miss them, even if you're angry with them too." I looked up at her then, this stranger who was supposed to be my new mother, and saw something in her eyes I'd been searching for my whole life without knowing it. Unconditional acceptance. She wasn't disappointed that I was a girl. She wasn't calculating my worth against my potential usefulness. She was just glad I was there. But even at 8, I knew better than to trust it completely. Love, I'd learned, was conditional, temporary, something that could be withdrawn without warning and without appeal. The Miller house was nothing like the home I'd left behind. Where our house had been small and cluttered and filled with the constant background noise of Dad's TV shows and Mom's sighing, this place felt peaceful, calm, like a deep breath held in warm sunshine. My new room was exactly as Margaret had described. Yellow walls with white trim, a window that looked out over a garden where actual flowers grew in neat, colorful rows. There was a desk for homework, shelves for books, and a bed with so many pillows it looked like something from a fairy tale. "This is all mine?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "All yours," David confirmed. "And if you want to change anything, the color, the furniture, anything at all, we can do that together." Together. It was a word my biological family had rarely used when it came to including me in decisions. That first night, I lay in my new bed staring at the ceiling, trying to process the earthquake that had shaken my life apart. Everything I thought I knew about family, about love, about my place in the world, had been revealed as an illusion. I was 8 years old, and I'd already learned the cruelest lesson life has to teach, that the people who are supposed to love you most can walk away from you like you never mattered at all. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, I heard something I'd never heard in my old house. The sound of adults talking quietly in the next room, not about problems or money or disappointments, but about me, about how to help me feel safe, about how to help me heal. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, not all families were built on conditions and calculations. Maybe some were built on something stronger. I just wasn't ready to believe in it yet. Not after everything I'd lost. Not after learning that even a parent's love could have an expiration date. The darkness that followed wasn't the gentle darkness of a bedroom at night. It was the suffocating blackness of a soul that had been hollowed out and left to echo with its own emptiness. In those first weeks with the Millers, I moved through their beautiful house like a ghost, present but not really there, breathing but not quite alive. I'd wake up every morning expecting to hear Mom calling me for breakfast, expecting to smell Dad's coffee and cigarettes, expecting Tommy to pound on the bathroom door telling me to hurry up. Instead, I'd find Margaret humming in the kitchen, making pancakes shaped like animals, asking me what I wanted to drink, acting like my preferences actually mattered. It felt like a trick, an elaborate setup for another crushing disappointment. They'll get tired of me too, I told myself every night as I stared at the ceiling of my yellow room. Once they realize I'm not special, not worth keeping, they'll find another family to dump me on. I began testing them in small ways. I left my clothes on the floor to see if they'd yell. They didn't. I forgot to say thank you at dinner to see if they'd lecture me about gratitude. They didn't. I even deliberately spilled juice on their white carpet to see if they'd finally show their true colors, reveal the anger and disappointment I was sure they were hiding. David just got the carpet cleaner and showed me how to use it, explaining that accidents happen to everyone. That's what family is for, he said simply. We clean up each other's messes. But I couldn't let myself believe it. Believing meant hoping, and hoping meant setting myself up to be crushed again. So I built walls instead, invisible barriers that kept the Millers at arm's length even as they continued trying to reach me with their patient, persistent kindness. School became my escape. At Jefferson Elementary, no one knew my story. I was just the new girl who'd moved to town, not the unwanted daughter who'd been thrown away like yesterday's newspaper. I threw myself into my studies with desperate intensity, as if perfect grades could somehow prove that I was worth keeping, that I deserved to exist. But even there, reminders of my abandonment lurked around every corner. When we had to draw pictures of our families for art class, I stared at the blank paper for 45 minutes, paralyzed. Did I draw the Johnsons, who'd rejected me? The Millers, who I wasn't sure I belonged with? Or just myself, alone in the middle of the page with no connections to anyone? I ended up drawing a house with no people in it at all. "Where's your family, Sarah?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently when she saw my drawing. "I don't have one," I said matter-of-factly, and watched her face crumple with sympathy I didn't want. At home, and I couldn't bring myself to call it that not yet, Margaret and David continued their careful campaign of unconditional love. They never pushed for information about my past, never demanded gratitude or emotional responses I wasn't ready to give. They just existed in my orbit like gentle planets, providing warmth and stability while I figured out how to trust again. Margaret would read to me every night, even though I was old enough to read by myself. She'd sit on the edge of my bed with whatever book I'd chosen, her voice soft and soothing as she brought characters to life. Sometimes I pretended to fall asleep just so she'd stay longer, her presence the only thing that kept the nightmares at bay. David taught me how to garden, showing me how to plant seeds and tend them and trust that they'd grow into something beautiful given enough time and care. I didn't understand the metaphor then, but I felt it somewhere deep in my bones. The idea that broken things could be healed, that abandoned things could find new soil and flourish. But the healing wasn't linear. Some days, I'd almost let myself believe that this could be real, that I could have a family again. Other days, the weight of my abandonment would crash over me like a tidal wave, leaving me gasping and desperate and convinced that everyone I'd ever trusted would eventually walk away. Those were the days when the darkness felt absolute, when I'd lock myself in my room and cry until my throat was raw, mourning not just the family I'd lost, but the version of myself who'd believed she was lovable. That little girl had died in the parking lot outside the social services building, and I wasn't sure what was left of me without her. One particularly bad night, about 6 months after coming to live with the Millers, I made a decision that still haunts me. I packed my small suitcase, the same one I'd brought from my old life, and crept out of the house at 2 a.m. I was going to run away, to disappear completely, to save the Millers the trouble of eventually getting rid of me themselves. I made it 3 blocks before David found me. He didn't yell or lecture or demand explanations. He just sat down on the curb beside me and waited for me to be ready to talk. "I don't want you to throw me away too," I finally whispered into the darkness. "We're not going to throw you away, Sarah," he said quietly. "Not ever. Not for any reason." "But what if I'm bad? What if I disappoint you? What if you realize you made a mistake?" David was quiet for a long moment, and I was sure he was figuring out how to break it to me gently that I was right, that I was too damaged, too much trouble, too broken to keep. Instead, he said, "Do you know why Margaret and I wanted to adopt?" I shook my head. "Because we had so much love to give and no one to give it to. We tried for years to have biological children, and it just wasn't meant to be. But then we heard about you, and we knew. We knew you were supposed to be our daughter. Not because you were perfect or easy or exactly what we expected, but because you were you. And you is exactly who we wanted." The words hit something deep inside me, some frozen place that had been locked away since that terrible morning in the Johnson kitchen, but I was still too afraid to let it thaw completely. "But I'm broken," I whispered. "We're all broken in some way," David said gently. "That's what makes us human. But broken doesn't mean worthless, Sarah. It just means we need a little extra love to heal properly. And Margaret and I, we've got plenty of love to spare." That conversation didn't magically fix everything. Trust, real trust, takes time to build and even longer to rebuild once it's been shattered. But it planted a seed, the tiniest possibility that maybe, just maybe, not everyone would leave me when things got difficult. Over the months that followed, that seed grew slowly. Margaret never missed a bedtime story, even when she was sick or tired. David never failed to ask about my day, to really listen to my answer, to remember the small details that mattered to me. They showed up to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every moment when I needed them to be present. And gradually, cautiously, I began to let them in. I started calling them Mom and Dad, not to replace the Johnsons, but because that's what they were becoming to me. Real parents, the kind who stayed no matter what. But even as I healed, even as I learned to trust in the Millers' love, the wound left by my biological family continued to fester. Late at night, when the house was quiet and my defenses were down, I'd find myself wondering about them. Did they ever think about me? Did they ever regret their decision? Did Tommy even remember he had a sister? I'd fantasize sometimes about running into them at the grocery store or the mall, imagining different scenarios where they'd realize their mistake and beg me to come home. In some fantasies, I'd forgive them graciously. In others, I'd turn my back on them the way they'd turned theirs on me. But as the years passed and no contact came, no birthday cards, no Christmas presents, no awkward phone calls or unexpected visits, I realized the truth that 8-year-old me hadn't been ready to accept. They hadn't made a mistake. They'd made a choice. A calculated, deliberate choice to prioritize their son's future over their daughter's existence. And that choice had consequences that would ripple through my life in ways they could never have imagined. 22 years later, I stood in my therapist's office holding a revelation that would change everything. Dr. Martinez had just finished explaining something called gender-based family rejection, and suddenly, every piece of my broken childhood clicked into place like a jigsaw puzzle finally revealing its picture. "You mean it wasn't my fault?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't give me away because I was a bad kid or because I wasn't lovable enough?" "Sarah," Dr. Martinez said gently, leaning forward in her chair, "what your biological parents did to you was a form of systemic discrimination. In many traditional families, sons are valued over daughters for economic and cultural reasons. It had absolutely nothing to do with your worth as a human being." The anger hit me like a lightning bolt, pure, righteous fury that started in my chest and spread through my entire body like wildfire. For 22 years, I'd carried the burden of believing I wasn't good enough, wasn't valuable enough, wasn't worthy enough to keep. But it wasn't about me at all. It was about their toxic, antiquated beliefs about gender roles and family legacy. "They threw away their own child because she didn't have a penis," I said, the words coming out sharp and bitter. They destroyed an 8-year-old's entire world because she couldn't carry on the precious family name. Your anger is completely justified, Dr. Martinez confirmed. What they did was emotional abuse and abandonment. The fact that you survived it and built a life with the Millers shows incredible resilience. Resilience. The word felt foreign on my tongue. I'd never thought of myself as resilient. I'd thought of myself as damaged goods that the Millers had been kind enough to repair. But as I drove home from that session, something fundamental shifted inside me. I wasn't the broken, unwanted girl I'd believed myself to be for over 2 decades. I was a survivor, a warrior who'd been through hell and come out the other side stronger. That night, I called Mom, Margaret Miller, the woman who'd earned that title through love and consistency rather than biology. "Mom," I said when she answered, "I need to tell you something. I'm ready to hear the truth about what happened to my biological parents." There was a long pause. Mom and Dad had always been careful not to speak badly of the Johnsons, even though they knew the basic facts of my abandonment. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Mom asked carefully. "Once you know, you can't unknow it." "I'm sure. I need to understand who they became after they threw me away." What I learned over the next few weeks, through careful internet searches and a private investigator I hired with my savings, painted a picture that was both satisfying and tragic. Robert Johnson, my biological father, had never achieved the success he'd sacrificed his daughter for. He'd bounced between construction jobs, never advancing beyond basic labor. The son he'd prioritized, Tommy, had dropped out of college after 2 semesters and spent most of his 20s in and out of trouble. Minor drug charges, DUIs, a brief stint in county jail for assault. Linda Johnson, my biological mother, had developed a drinking problem that had cost her multiple jobs and friendships. She'd spent the last decade working part-time at a grocery store, barely making ends meet. They were still together, still living in the same small house where they'd made the decision to give me away. But their marriage had become a bitter shell, held together by resentment and shared disappointment rather than love. Tommy, the golden child they'd kept, was now 32, unemployed, and living in their basement with a gambling addiction and no prospects. The family they'd chosen over me had imploded spectacularly. But the most shocking discovery came when I dug deeper into their financial situation. They were drowning in debt, credit cards, medical bills, a second mortgage they couldn't afford. The son they'd invested everything in had costed them more money than they'd ever had and given them nothing in return but heartache. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I'd graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in business administration. I was working as a financial analyst at a prestigious firm in Chicago. I owned my own condo, had a healthy savings account, and was in a loving relationship with a man who treated me like the treasure the Johnsons had thrown away. The irony was delicious and devastating at the same time. But the real game changer came 6 months later when Dad, David Miller, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The illness progressed quickly, too quickly. Within 3 months, this man who'd saved me from a lifetime of feeling worthless was lying in a hospital bed, holding my hand and trying to prepare me for a world without him in it. "Sarah," he whispered during one of our final conversations, "I need you to know that adopting you was the best decision Margaret and I ever made. You gave our lives meaning." "Dad, don't talk like this is goodbye," I said, though we both knew it was. "Listen to me," he insisted with what little strength he had left. "I'm leaving everything to you and your mother, the house, the business, all of it. But there's something else." He squeezed my hand weakly. "I've been more successful than we ever let on. We didn't want you to feel like you owed us anything or to worry about money. But the truth is, we're leaving you very comfortable. More than comfortable." The numbers he whispered to me made my head spin. David Miller hadn't just been a kind man who'd taken in a broken child. He'd been a brilliant businessman who'd built a small empire through careful investments and strategic acquisitions. The man who'd taught me to plant seeds in the garden had been planting financial seeds for decades, watching them grow into something extraordinary. When he passed away 3 weeks later, I learned the full extent of his legacy. $15 million, properties in 3 states, a foundation he'd established for children's welfare that he wanted me to run. I was 30 years old, and I was suddenly wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. But money, I quickly discovered, has a way of revealing people's true nature, especially family members who'd written you off decades earlier. The first contact came through Facebook, of all places. A friend request from Tommy Johnson that I stared at for 20 minutes before accepting, my heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and rage. His message was pathetic in its transparency. "Hey sis, I know it's been forever, but I heard about your dad passing. I'm so sorry for your loss. I've been thinking about you a lot lately and wondering how you're doing. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime and catch up. It would be great to reconnect with family." Family. The word tasted like poison coming from him. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I screenshot the message and sent it to Dr. Martinez with a note. "The vultures are circling." Her response was swift and clear. "Don't engage until you're emotionally prepared for their agenda." But I was emotionally prepared. 22 years of therapy, self-work, and healing had prepared me for exactly this moment. I knew exactly what they wanted, and I knew exactly what I was going to give them. Nothing. Tommy's follow-up messages became increasingly desperate over the next few weeks. He tried nostalgia. "Remember when we used to build forts in the backyard?" He tried guilt. "Mom and Dad really miss you and regret how things ended." He tried manipulation. "We're family, Sarah. Blood is thicker than water." I finally responded with a single sentence. "Give me Robert and Linda's phone number." The call I made to my biological father was one of the most satisfying conversations of my life. "Sarah?" His voice cracked when he heard mine, 22 years older but unmistakably his abandoned daughter. "Sarah? Is that really you?" "Hello, Robert," I said calmly, deliberately not calling him Dad. "I understand you've been looking for me." "Oh, honey, yes! We've missed you so much. We never stopped thinking about you, never stopped loving you." The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly, I almost admired his audacity. Almost. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice ice cold. Because I have a very different memory of our last conversation. Something about me not being real family. Something about girls not needing opportunities the way boys do. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Sarah, we were young. We made mistakes." "You were 35 and 33, I interrupted. "You weren't young. You were adults who made a calculated decision to abandon your daughter because she wasn't the gender you wanted." "It wasn't like that," he protested weakly. "We thought you'd be better off with the Millers. You thought you'd rather spend money on Tommy than on me. You thought I was disposable. You thought wrong." Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become more desperate, more calculating. "Look, Sarah, I know you're upset, and you have every right to be, but we're family, and family forgives each other. Family helps each other out." There it was, the real reason for the sudden contact. "Help each other out," I repeated slowly. Interesting choice of words. Tell me, Robert, how exactly did you help me out when I was 8 years old and begging you not to give me away? That's different. We're in a difficult situation right now, financially, and you heard I inherited money." The silence that followed was deafening. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice taking on a wheedling tone, "we're your parents. We gave you life. Surely that counts for something." The audacity of it took my breath away. They had given me life, then spent 8 years making me wish I didn't have it, then literally gave me away when I became inconvenient. Now they wanted credit for the biological accident of my conception? "You know what?" I said, my voice deadly calm. "You're absolutely right. You did give me life, and then you taught me the most valuable lesson I ever learned." "What's that?" "You taught me that DNA doesn't make a family. Love does, commitment does. Showing up every day, even when it's hard, even when it's expensive, even when the child doesn't turn out exactly like you planned, that's what makes a family." I could hear his breathing getting heavier on the other end of the line. You also taught me that people who abandon you once will do it again the moment you stop being useful to them. So thank you for that lesson, Robert. It saved me from a lot of disappointment over the years. Sarah, please. No. You had your chance to be my father. You gave it up voluntarily. David Miller earned that title through 2 decades of unconditional love. You don't get to come back now that he's gone and try to claim a relationship you never wanted. But I know what you need, I cut him off. You need money. You need someone to bail out the son you chose over me. You need someone to fix the mess you made of your lives. But here's the thing, Robert. I'm not in the business of enabling people who've already proven they'll throw me away when it suits them. The line went quiet except for the sound of his labored breathing. Your son Tommy, the one you sacrificed me for? He's 32 and living in your basement with a gambling problem. Your wife Linda is working at a grocery store to pay for the alcohol that helps her forget what kind of person she became. Your house is mortgaged to the hilt and you're drowning in debt. How do you— I know because I had you investigated. I wanted to understand what happened to the family that was supposedly more important than keeping me. And you know what I found? Karma. I took a deep breath, centering myself for the final blow. I'm worth $15 million, Robert. $15 million. The daughter you threw away because she couldn't carry on your family name is worth more than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. The girl you didn't think deserved opportunities now runs a foundation that helps children who've been abandoned by their families. The mistake you thought you were correcting turned out to be the only thing you ever did right. The sound he made was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. So, here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice steady as steel. You're going to tell Tommy and Linda that you found me, but I want nothing to do with any of you. You're going to stop trying to contact me through social media, through mutual acquaintances, through anyone. You gave up the right to call me family 22 years ago. That decision is permanent. Sarah, please, we made mistakes, but we can fix this. No, I said with finality. You can't fix this. Some things once broken can't be repaired. Some choices once made can't be undone. You chose Tommy over me when I was 8 years old. Live with that choice. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked their numbers. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with messages from extended family members I hadn't heard from in decades. Suddenly, everyone remembered Sarah Johnson. Suddenly, everyone was so sorry about the misunderstanding. Suddenly, everyone wanted to reconnect. I blocked them all. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later when I was grocery shopping in Chicago and literally ran into Linda Johnson in the cereal aisle. She was older, grayer, with the defeated posture of someone who'd spent decades running from her own choices. She was wearing a name tag that said, "Linda, happy to help." For a moment, we just stared at each other. 2 women whose lives had taken such different paths from that moment 22 years ago when she'd signed papers giving me away. "Sarah?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Is it really you?" I looked at this woman who'd carried me for 9 months, who'd taught me to tie my shoes and brush my teeth, who'd ultimately decided I wasn't worth keeping, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing for reconciliation. Just a vast, peaceful emptiness where pain used to live. "I'm sorry," I said politely. "I think you have me confused with someone else." And I walked away. Behind me, I heard her calling my name, her voice getting more desperate with each repetition. But I didn't turn around. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had written the ending myself. 6 months later, I married James Patterson in a ceremony surrounded by the family I'd chosen. Mom, Margaret, friends who'd become siblings, colleagues who'd become confidants, and mentors who'd become parental figures. The church was full of people who'd proven their love through actions rather than accidents of genetics. As I walked down the aisle in the dress David Miller would have loved to see me wear, I thought about the 8-year-old girl who'd been convinced she was unlovable. That little girl had been wrong. She wasn't unlovable. She'd just been loved by the wrong people. The right people had found her eventually. They'd taught her that family isn't about blood or names or carrying on legacies. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other, again and again, especially when it's hard. The Johnsons had taught me that lesson too, just not in the way they'd intended. They'd taught me what not to accept, what not to settle for, what not to mistake for love. And now, as I built my own family with James, as I used my inheritance to help other abandoned children find their place in the world, as I lived each day as proof that thrown away things can grow into something extraordinary, I understood the most important truth of all. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's living so well that the people who hurt you become irrelevant to your joy. It's building something so beautiful from the ashes of their rejection that their approval becomes worthless compared to your own self-respect. The daughter they'd discarded had become a woman they could never deserve, and that was exactly as it should be. 3 years after that conversation with Robert Johnson, I received a letter that had been forwarded through 4 different addresses to reach me. The return address read Robert Johnson in shaky handwriting. I almost threw it away without opening it, but something made me curious enough to read what he had to say. The letter was 3 pages of rambling apologies and justifications, but the important information was in the last paragraph. Linda had died 6 months earlier from liver failure. Tommy had overdosed on fentanyl 2 weeks after his mother's funeral. Robert was alone in the house where he'd made the decision to give me away, and he was dying of the same cancer that had taken David Miller. He wanted to see me one last time. He wanted forgiveness. He wanted to make amends. I read the letter twice, then placed it in my fireplace and watched it burn. Some bridges, once destroyed, should stay that way. Some chapters, once closed, shouldn't be reopened. Some people earn their loneliness through their choices. I had a family to raise. James and I had just adopted 2 sisters from foster care, girls aged 6 and 8, who needed to learn what real love looked like. I had a foundation to run, children to help, a life full of people who'd chosen me and whom I'd chosen in return. The woman who'd once been the unwanted daughter of the Johnsons was now the beloved mother of the Patterson family. The girl who'd been thrown away had built something worth keeping, and that was the only ending that mattered.